back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. As always, I'm Stef Albiero. I'm here with the fantasy phenom, Alex Lott, and we're diving into free agency today. It's that time of the year. It seems like there's a breaking news item that hits the airwaves like every hour on the hour. It's a crazy time right now. It's a fun time. I'm so excited for this season, and I was already excited for the combine and the whole rookie draft process. The NFL is the gift that just keeps on giving. If you're a fan of the NFL right now, it's a fun time. Alex, don't you just love where we're at right now with pro football?
Yeah, it's an absolute blast, and we're breaking down today a lot of the free agency moves that we've seen and how they impact dynasty rosters and things like that, and just how they impact these teams. We might throw in some redraft takes as well as we talk about some of these names, but it's going to be primarily focused on dynasty. And we're recording this March 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone out there, at about 5 p.m. Eastern time. So there's going to be some stuff that happens probably between when we're recording this and when you're watching. You know, the Deshaun Watson news is supposed to be coming any second now. Might happen during the show. Who knows? But we'll talk about him a little bit, but we'll try to keep it brief just because we're probably going to get a lot more news after we release the pod. We're going to get into a ton of takes. A lot of dominoes have fallen. We just saw Allen Robinson sign with the Rams at the time of this recording. So a lot of the big moves have been made, but still a lot of interesting names out there as well. And we'll hit on some of those towards the end, maybe with a couple predictions and things like that. And we can see what ends up happening as those dominoes continue to fall. But Steph, I'm excited. One last thing I'll throw out there. I know I'm saying some stuff is going to change. It's breaking news every hour on the hour, it seems at this point, but that's why our Discord is there. Have to plug the Discord. It's in the link below. That's where you and I are hanging out, talking to our community, talking about dynasty trades, dynasty moves, all these landing spots. And Steph, you recently started posting your rookie rankings in there as well for 2022. So if you're not in there already, be sure to join. You'll be up to date with us on all the breaking news.
What I love too about those rookie rankings, which I did also post on Twitter, you can follow us there at Double Move Sport. I went in depth as far as what we're looking for with these prospects. We don't only just want to throw our takes out there and what our feelings are on players. We want to be able to back that up with logic, with reasoning. I got to stay off Twitter these days. I got to stay off Reddit these days because the takes that you see are just like, oh, I feel like so-and-so is going to go there. It's just like that there's no logic to that take because you have a feeling. I'm not going to base my fantasy decisions, the money that I'm putting into these leagues, on feelings that guys have. We want to have a process behind this.
We'll sit back and we'll get our popcorn ready because Deshaun Watson's going to be on the move soon, and it's going to create a ripple effect throughout the league with some of the other quarterbacks that are on the market right now, the Jimmy G's of the world, maybe even Baker Mayfield, who I think we're going to get into next, and then the free agents that are still out there like Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota. It's going to start that domino effect where some of these teams are going to start reaching for some of these quarterbacks.
Man, this Browns situation is just it's horrible to watch as a fan of the Browns, but it is fascinating. The drama, right? The content that the NFL gives us to talk about all year long. We're in the dead of the offseason, and it seems like there's more drama now than there was even in the playoffs down the stretch there because it was so chalky. But for Baker Mayfield, it's just gotten uglier and uglier as time has gone on. Starts with the Browns being front runners in the Deshaun Watson deal. They did have a meeting with Deshaun Watson. My take, and this is somebody, I'm a Browns fan. I watch every single game. I'm in tune with what's happening with the team. I follow all their beat reporters. What it sounds like to me, and the details haven't come out on this yet, it's either that the front office didn't talk to Baker at all, and so Baker just gets online, eating breakfast, checking the newspaper, and he's like, what the heck? They're talking about moving me to Houston and all these kind of things. That could have been what kind of was the tipping point for him. The other perspective, the other take I have is that they did actually sit down with Baker and say, hey, we're looking to move you. We want to bring Deshaun Watson in. And he didn't take to that very well. We know the spunk, the gravitas that Baker Mayfield has. He shows that on the field. He is a petty guy, for lack of a better term. And the fact that he went on social media and sent out this like pseudo goodbye, everybody, I think was his way of saying like, hey, things are turning sour. They've told me, or I'm learning now for the first time, that I'm potentially going to be moved in favor of Deshaun Watson. I'm sure Baker Mayfield feels like, hey, I just played a whole season injured for you guys. I've been balling out compared to what's been in Cleveland prior to my rookie deal, got us to the playoffs the first time in 17 years. Like, I would probably be upset if I were him. But now the pettiness reaches a new level where Baker Mayfield's requesting a formal trade to the front office. The front office has already said they're not going to trade him. They could be playing hardball, trying to increase his value, trying to get more aggressive trade offers from teams like the Colts, who've been heavily implied in some of the trade talks with Baker. But now it just seems like Baker doesn't have the clout of an Aaron Rodgers where he can threaten to hold out. He can threaten not to play. Alex, I like your take on it, which is the Browns need to move him to at least get something back, because they're for sure not going to extend him on a big contract after this rookie deal's up in 2022.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a tough situation because, you got Baker requesting a trade and you got the Browns saying no. But honestly, it is this standoff of both of the prides of the, like, I get Baker Mayfield's stance. He wants to get moved. It seems like there has been some friction there with Stefanski, with the coaching staff, with the front office. But I don't really understand Cleveland's take of saying we're not going to trade you. Like, maybe they're going to give it one last-ditch effort to mend that relationship. But I do think it's some pride getting in the way there because, like, they're not even willing to commit to him long-term. What incentive do they have to really go mend that relationship? If I'm Cleveland, I'm saying, look, we're not committing to this guy long-term with a big contract. We're probably not going to win it all with Baker right now, especially if he's discontent and there's just this drama all over our locker room, all over our organization. Like, it's not going to happen this year if that's the case. And then with him as a free agent next year, you're going to lose him for nothing. So he still is a young quarterback who has showed promise, who has been to the playoffs, who was playing hurt last season. So I think they could probably move him for a decent amount of draft capital. I mean, we saw Carson Wentz and his full contract get moved for 2/3. So it's like Baker should be able to yield at least a second rounder plus, maybe even a late first. I doubt it would be a first rounder at this point, but you never know. He's a young quarterback who showed a lot of promise and has upside. So I think they could get some really good draft capital in return for Baker. And me as a Colts fan, we're in this waiting period again. Any second now, news could break about the quarterback. And I've seen option after option kind of be taken off the board for the Colts. And I'm like, oh, Baker being back in the mix as a potential option, I'm cool with that because I think he's an upgrade from Wentz. I think his downside is enough to give them more than what they had in Wentz last year or Rivers the year before. It's a win-now roster. I expect them to draft a wide receiver or sign one of these free agents that are left. Slim pickings, but we'll see. And so I think Baker coming in is a good option. They have cap space to fill out the rest of the roster, and we know Baker has upside. So if he comes in, no matter where he goes, even if it's in Cleveland, it's going to be a prove-it year for him. And then if he doesn't prove it, he'll hit the open market next season.
And Seattle seems to be a team that is also in the mix, try to take Baker Mayfield's contract on, give him an opportunity. And if he produces, looks like the franchise guy that we thought he might have been at one point in Cleveland, maybe he is their long-term answer there. But let's talk about another AFC North quarterback, Mitchell Trubisky, signing to the Pittsburgh Steelers. My immediate thought here for the Pittsburgh weapons, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson. We'll see if Juju returns to the team. My guess is that he won't. And he's going to hit the open market, look for a bigger deal. His deal could come through the timeline any minute now. But for Trubisky, this is absolutely an upgrade from Mason Rudolph. We have seen, maybe not for real life, but for at least fantasy, Trubisky was able to produce a wide receiver one in Allen Robinson. You look back at his 2018 season, that was his most efficient season, where he had over 3,200 passing yards, 24-12 touchdown interception ratio. Interceptions really don't matter to me that much as a super flex dynasty aficionado. And then he had 421 rushing yards on the ground, another 3 touchdowns there. So not only is Mitchell Trubisky more mobile, obviously, than Big Ben, probably going to have a bigger arm than Big Ben, probably going to make more mistakes than Big Ben, but he's definitely an upgrade to Mason Rudolph, and I think that keeps all the weapons afloat. I'm still in on Deontay Johnson as a guy who's kind of fighting for that low-end wide receiver one spot. We'll see once a couple more of these chips fall where he actually lands in our dynasty values, Alex. But what are your thoughts here for Mitch Trubisky and the weapons? Probably the biggest winner here is Chase Claypool.
Yeah, I think the winner is definitely Claypool just because of Trubisky's arm strength, and the noodle arm of Big Ben late in his career just wasn't getting it done with Claypool. But I think Trubisky himself is a huge winner as well. And when we think about this offense as a whole, I do think for the weapons, for Deontay, Freiermuth, Claypool, and even Najee Harris. I think it is a neutral at worst type of situation, where I think worst case scenario, their value is going to stay the same. But I think best case scenario, I mean, we could see them really elevate, because I was watching some Trubisky highlights. Yes, I know that's a brave thing to do, but I was watching some Trubisky highlights. I was like, holy smokes, this guy is incredible. Like his highs were high, but I do know that his lows were low. And I think, him going from Chicago to Buffalo, the easy comp for Mitch Trubisky is Josh Allen. Like when the Bears drafted Mitch Trubisky, the expectation was, hey, raw prospect. He's a big guy. He's got a ton of arm strength. He can run. Let's see if we can develop him as a passer. Didn't quite work out. With Josh Allen, it did. So now he goes to nowhere else but Buffalo to sit behind Josh Allen. Hopefully he learned a thing or two, and he can have the second chance in his career, kind of like we saw from Ryan Tannehill going to the Tennessee Titans. So I like it for Trubisky. I think he's got potential, but for the weapons, I think it's neutral at worst. For Trubisky himself, we've seen him have upside weeks. We've seen him have 30-plus point fantasy outings. He does run the ball. He can get into the end zone with his legs. So I think for Trubisky, he's going to be a QB2 this season. And a little hot take to end the Trubisky takes here. I think we will see Trubisky be a top 5 quarterback on the week at least 2 times this season. I think he'll have at least 2 games where he is a top 5 guy on the week, giving you somewhere from 25, 30 fantasy points, because that's just the upside he has.
100%. And the reason we're not worried about Deontay is because we saw Deontay Johnson not only break out when Mason Rudolph was under center in Pittsburgh, and we're saying, Trubisky's a clear upgrade to Mason Rudolph in every single way. He has all the tools. He has the higher draft capital, better production, all of these things. But Deontay Johnson, regardless of quarterback, has always produced. He finds a way to get open. Mason Rudolph as a starter last year in that Detroit game that went into almost like double overtime or ended in a tie. We see Deontay 7 for 83. In years past, he was fine when Rudolph was under center. So Deontay's as safe as it gets. The guy you want in Dynasty right now. So only 25 years old, hits his age prime over the next 2 seasons, his super prime. So he's a guy that if you have him and you're contending, definitely hold on. And he's a guy, if you're rebuilding maybe 1 or 2 years out, he's just a cornerstone asset in your wide receiver core to keep there. Nothing really changes for Najee Harris other than the offense. Will probably a little bit more electric. Now it'll be more raw of an offense. We're going to see a lot more turnovers, but the big plays that we even saw in some game scripts in Pittsburgh last year, I think are just going to be more common in almost every single scenario. We'll see how much Mike Tomlin wants to turn down Trubisky's arm strength, taking those deep shots, because we do see him do that with Mason Rudolph. We'll get into the projections as we get closer to this season, as we finalize draft moves, free agency signings, and have a much more robust picture on what this Trubisky offense is going to look like. But I think it was probably the best option available for Pittsburgh to go out and get their Josh Allen prototype to try to develop him in what's typically been a really good organization for player development, especially wide receivers.
Steph, one more quick thing on Pittsburgh before we move on. I know you mentioned Najee Harris. I do think it's a lateral move, but I can see the takes right now. I can see people, they're typing them up. They're about to say them. They're going to say, oh, he's not going to get the check down volume because Big Ben dumped it to him over and over again. I do expect the number of receptions to probably come down a little bit, but I expect the offensive efficiency, the touchdown upside, things like that to increase. So I think that can net out for Najee Harris. Plus, they've already brought in a couple of offensive linemen. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they're like the most elite ones on the market, but they're trying to address that position. And it was absolutely brutal last season. I do think it opens things up. So don't be too scared of the passing volume. He still is an elite receiving back, and he will get utilized, and they'll draw up screens, draw up plays for him out of the backfield. But it might affect his dump down volume a little bit. But you got to remember, Tariq Cohen caught a ton of passes in Chicago with Mitch Trubisky.
91 targets in 2018, 104 targets for Tariq Cohen in 2019 with Trubisky there. So if we're just looking at player tendencies, the opportunity's there. If you have a running back that can command target share, and we've already seen that Najee Harris in spades. Let's talk about a wide receiver. The news just broke before we went live here. Allen Robinson signing a 3-year deal, $46.5 million with $30.7 million fully guaranteed with the Los Angeles Rams. The first message that gets across, we try to read between the lines on this signing, is that they're probably not going to bring back Odell Beckham, or they did send him an offer, maybe it's a 1-year prove-it deal, knowing that, hey, we'd love to have you for the playoffs. We're not going to commit to you long-term. Too much injury risk is there for Odell Beckham. And for ARob, this just takes his floor to a whole new level. Even if you were worried about that last season's performance in Chicago, right? You weren't making the excuses where it was the quarterback play, it was the offense, it was Matt Nagy, it was the franchise tag, it was ARob's temperament towards the franchise, which a lot of that's going down narrative street. Even if you're worried about the performance, the fact that he's in LA with Matt Stafford, with a Super Bowl contending roster that's been fantastic ever since Sean McVay's been there. I don't want to sound like I'm saying Sean McVay's the reason ARob's going to be good, but he brings stability to an offense. We know he can get playmakers open and in space. He's going to pass the ball a lot and run the ball a lot. They run with a high pace of play there in LA in that McVay system. I actually like ARob as it stands right now because Robert Woods is coming off the ACL. I like ARob more than Woods to start the season. We'll see as we get closer how that shakes out. But what are your thoughts on that? Is that a hot take to say I'd rather have Allen Robinson on the outside over Robert Woods, who's kind of playing in the slot with Cooper Kupp, can play stretch Z's, getting used in jet sweep type situations? Who would you rather have?
I don't think it's too hot of a take with Woods coming off of the ACL. In PPR leagues, I still lean Woods if we're talking redraft. But I don't think it's egregious to take ARob and prefer ARob because he's going to add a great dynamic to this offense. I mean, we saw what Odell Beckham did. Odell looked – it was kind of a similar situation. Like, Odell looked – everyone was saying he was washed in Cleveland, comes over to LA, and it's like, no, he's not what he was when he was on the New York Giants, but he was still a really good player. I think with Allen Robinson, we could see the same thing. People are saying he's washed in Chicago, comes over to a good offense where it doesn't have to be the number one. He's seeing – coverages and worse corners than he's seen for his entire career. We could see him really start to make an impact. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, Cooper Kupp is the clear number one in this offense, obviously, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the target volume shaved off the top for Cooper Kupp and some of that distributed to Woods and Allen Robinson. I still think Kupp is easily a top 5 guy for redraft and for Dynasty right now. I do still have him in my top 5 at the wide receiver spot just because after the season last year, it's hard not to. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some of that volume more evenly distributed. But on the flip side, you got to think Cooper Kupp is able to continue to be effective because this Rams offense continues to throw weapons out on the field. Like if it was Cooper Kupp and nobody else, you could start to game plan against him. Like in the playoffs, every single game, I'm like, why are these teams not game planning for Cooper Kupp? They are, but when you also have a good running game and you also have, Odell Beckham, you also have Van Jefferson, you have all these options, it's really hard to do that. So I love Allen Robinson to LA. No, I don't think he's going to see the target volume that he saw in Chicago, but I think he's going to be a lot more efficient with them, with the targets that he does get. And I wouldn't be surprised to see his touchdowns close to 10 this season. I mean, 8 touchdowns would not surprise me. 10 touchdowns would not surprise me for Allen Robinson.
Yeah, I see the production and the game logs that Odell Beckham was putting on the field. I think ARob can do that. Maybe take some of the yak ability and move that over to more of a red zone threat. But that's the type of player that Allen Robinson is. He has 4 seasons, over 150 targets. We've seen him come back from injury and produce with terrible quarterback play from Blake Bortles to Trubisky, even in his prime and on his decline, Nick Foles, Justin Fields, rough rookie season. It doesn't matter. Well, granted, last year was brutal, but it doesn't really matter that much who ARob's QB is. And now we're seeing him get the best quarterback of his career, a Super Bowl winning Matt Stafford that looked fantastic last year. And looks like the Rams are just going to run it back. They really do not care about draft picks. They're just going to sign veteran after veteran and be in this perpetual win now mode, at least as long as Les Snead can keep that going. One note I will say from a dynasty perspective, Robert Woods, 29.9 years old, so about to turn 30. ARob, on the other hand, is 28 and a half. So just if you view 30 as the death sentence, which a lot of people do in dynasty, I personally do not. It depends on the type of receiver. If you look historically, smaller, more compact wide receivers typically hold up longer than big body outside X receivers like an Allen Robinson, even like a Dez Bryant, or we're seeing it right now with Julio Jones. Like those guys typically don't go into the mid-30s. More of that Larry Fitzgerald, it's kind of smaller, more compact slot separator is going to last a lot longer in the league. But I will definitely take Allen Robinson in Dynasty over Robert Woods, and it will probably turn out that way in redraft as it stands right now. But talking about more receivers, let's talk about the Jaguars.
Money bags over here.
The Jaguars. It's such a weird move. To me, this seems like Trent Baalke is trying to just say, like, I need to do something or else I'm going to lose my job. So I'm going to push my chips in on a few dart throws and see if a few of them hit and just shoot for a ceiling. We'll get into specifically the contracts here, but when you dig into when the team has an out, what the dead cap shakes out to, it's not as egregious as it might sound, saying, hey, Christian Kirk's going to get a 4-year, $72 million deal. I think the mindset for the Jaguars front office is let's have a bunch of guys come in, compete to be the number one outside X receiver. Let's make them earn a long-term contract if they ever get one. Let's move Marvin Jones into the slots. Maybe LaVisca can be kind of a gadget guy. Deebo Samuel take some carries kind of thing. But I think the high ceiling upside days of LaVisca Chenault that had you and I very much in on him last year leading up to the season are over. What are your thoughts now that we have Zay Jones on a 3-year, $24 million deal coming in, Evan Ingram coming in on a 1-year, $9 million deal, and then obviously the Christian Kirk U-Haul Brinks truck that was backed up in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I like what you said about, some of these deals aren't as egregious as they seem. Some of the stuff that's been reported, it can fluctuate. Like Christian Kirk, it was like, over $20 million a season, but a lot of that has to do with incentives and bonuses. Zay Jones the same way. So a lot of these deals, the numbers do fluctuate based on what you're looking at. Are they including a signing bonus? Are they including incentives, things like that? So first you have to take that into consideration. Second, you do have to look at the dead cap hits, when the money is being paid out, how long they're really committing to these guys and the guaranteed money. But even having said that, Steph, I think this is just egregious. This is ridiculous. I think it feels like they are in Madden franchise mode and they think they can just delete and restart if things don't work out. Like that's what it feels like to me. You just go nuts your first year of free agency on there because you have a ton of cap space. Because to me, I don't mind the Christian Kirk deal actually so much. I do think they overpaid him a little bit, but I get it. The wide receiver market's tough. He's the youngest good option on the market. He has been really solid to this point in his career. So bring him in and see what he can do. I don't mind that move. Get a young wide receiver with Trevor Lawrence, and maybe he's someone you can build for the future with. But I don't know. The Zay Jones thing, that's the one that goes above my head. Like, I don't know why you're paying this kind of money to Zay Jones. Over the last 3 seasons, he has less than 100 receptions combined, less than 1,000 yards combined, and 2 touchdowns. So I get that he's flashed, but he's more of like a 3-year, $4 million a season type of guy. Like a 3-year, $15 million deal. I'm like, okay, they're bringing in a depth piece, but 3 years up to $30 million is a little bit ridiculous. And then to pair that, you look at some of the moves they've made on the defensive side of the ball, which I get is beside this argument talking about dynasty, but they're bringing in linebackers for $15 million a year, a D tackle for $10 million a year, a cornerback for $10 million a year. So I get your narrative of this front office is like, hey, we got to do something or we're all losing our jobs. We got to try to win 8 games this year and show we're going in the right direction. But I think this offense is a mess for fantasy. I think that's all we can say about it. I think it's an absolute just cluster of players right now, and it's going to be really impossible, especially with Doug Peterson as the head coach, to be able to tell which ones are going to stick and which ones aren't. So at the receiver, you're right, they're 4 deep. Kirk, LaVisca, Marvin Jones, and Zay Jones. I'm with you. I'm putting my chips on Christian Kirk in that situation. The tight end, you got Evan Ingram and Dan Arnold, who they just traded a corner they took in the first round for last season, and now they bring in Evan Ingram on a 1-year deal, which is interesting because I think Dan Arnold was playing great before he got hurt last season. I thought 100%. He was a guy they were going to continue to roll with at the tight end spot. And yeah, it's just confusing. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in one of these veteran running backs on the market as well. You still got guys like Marlon Mack, Melvin Gordon, Leonard Fournette at the time of this recording. They're all still available. There's a couple other veteran names out there as well. Would it really surprise you if they brought in one of those guys? So it'll be
Jordan Howard. That's the real answer.
Jordan Howard, the Doug Peterson guy. So, but yeah, it's like at this point, I'm with you. If I have one of these guys, I'm probably just holding, and unless someone in your league is like over the moon about them. But it's going to be hard to sort out the noise. And you might have to wait for the regular season, see if there are some injuries, see who's on the field, see who's getting the snaps and the targets before you can start to craft some opinions. So it's tough to predict right now. It's tough to project what this offense is going to look like. But I think because they have brought in so many names, it actually devalues everybody a little bit across the board. But I'm with you. If I had to bet on one guy, and if I want one guy from this roster in Dynasty, at least at the wide receiver spot, it's Christian Kirk.
Kirk, a little over 25 years old, has the mid-second round draft capital, has the 4.4 40 time. decent athleticism. We've seen the production. We have seen him have actually 2 over 100 target seasons. Never hit 1,000 yards, but was very close last year, 982 yards. 1,000 seems to just be this arbitrary threshold, so I don't want to read into that too much. I think there's upside there for Kirk to come in and compete and be the outright one on the outside in this offense. They did not pay Christian Kirk slot receiver money. And I think that means they're going to at least try to tilt the tables in Christian Kirk's favor to play this outside X role. I think Zay Jones was the insurance policy on Christian Kirk, seeing Zay essentially come not off the streets, but he wasn't producing, then goes to the Raiders last year and actually has some pretty decent numbers, was commanding a good target share, was getting open, looked a lot better than we'd seen him in previous seasons. So Zay Jones seems like the outside X insurance policy on Christian Kirk, where if he doesn't work out, okay, let's move Kirk into the slot, use him in another way, and have Zay Jones play that outside role. A lot of this seems like stability moves as well. What it looks like here, and I'm going to dive into the contracts, is the front office and Doug Peterson said, hey, we're going to give ourselves 2 years to make this thing work. And if we can't get ourselves out of one of the worst teams in the league and one of the softish divisions in pro football, that they're just going to blow it up again. And who knows where Trevor Lawrence is going to be at that point. He may be in a Baker Mayfield situation where things start to go south. He's nearing that time where he wants to get paid. And this is a guy who's taken first overall, just like Baker Mayfield. But for Christian Kirk, that 4-year, $72 million deal, when you see a big number like that over a long period of time, you have to just dive a little bit deeper into the contract. And I learned this the hard way with the Aaron Jones contract, because a lot of people, including myself, saw the big money. Like, hey, they're trying to keep this nucleus together with Rodgers, Adams, and Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones has that long-term deal, but when you take a step deeper, you look at actually the team's pretty much set to cut this guy unless they literally win the Super Bowl and they want to bring everybody back, which is what you're betting on if you're a player signing a deal like this. Christian Kirk's betting on himself to come in and make the Jaguars have to pay him a monster deal when there's not that much of a dead cap.
It just happened with Amari Cooper, 5-year, $100 million a couple of years ago, and look at what just happened to him. Exactly.
So when you see a contract like this, you have to dig deeper. It is an inflated wide receiver market. The Jaguars probably don't know what they're doing. But really, when you look at it, this is a 2-year deal. We saw Michael Gallup get $12 million a year. Mike Williams, $16 million a year. We saw Allen Robinson land essentially somewhere in the middle between those two. And for Christian Kirk's contract, he has over $30 million in dead cap in 2022 and 2023. So the Jaguars are at least committing to him for 2 seasons. Then there's a team out in 2024. And he's only $10 million against the cap if they choose to cut him. So, again, Kirk is betting on himself. If the Jags, let's say, make a deep playoff run, they win a soft division and can actually get hot, Trevor Lawrence takes that next step, Kirk becomes a stud wide receiver 1, and he could be worth a $21 million cap hit. If they keep him in 2024, my guess is that probably will not happen. As it stands right now, I like Kirk a lot for redraft because he does have that upside to be the one. I believe in Trevor Lawrence growth season over season. Love what Doug Peterson can bring to that offense just from a pace of play and a pass-to-run ratio standpoint. But I hate Doug Peterson for Travis Etienne. But one of the great things that we see, and this is very similar, it's more and more analogous to the DeAndre Swift situation for Travis Etienne, where they're probably going to bring in a between the tackles grinder to split work with him, which is going to cause people, especially in redraft, to fade. He's on what's perceived as one of the worst offenses in the league. The wide receiver core doesn't have a true alpha stud target magnet, just like the Lions last year was Amon-Ra St. Brown and TJ Hawkinson. And then all the other targets went to DeAndre Swift. I think very similar situation now, seeing how this receiving core is shaking out in Jacksonville. Maybe they bring in a Justin Ross in the draft. You see that mocked. It's a pretty fun situation to kind of think about, bringing the Clemson boys back together in Duval County. But I actually love all these moves for Etienne, knowing that there's going to be less target competition for him.
In Dynasty, the sentiment has been that Etienne's value is rising, especially with J-Rob's injury. It's like, okay, Etienne is getting harder and harder to acquire. I do think that if Jacksonville does bring in another running back, a Marlon Mack, a Dearness Johnson, a Melvin Gordon, one of these names that's still on the market, or they draft somebody on like late day 2 or something like that, or day 3, I do think Etienne goes straight into the buy category. Because I think they could bring a guy in, muddy the waters a little bit. But I agree with you. DeAndre Swift had a ton of value. And there were games in Detroit, terrible offense. DeAndre Swift wasn't even in on like the first or second series. And you're like, is he like a surprise scratch? And then he'd come out, suddenly get involved, have 5 receptions on one drive, and then break a 50-yard run later in the game. So I think ETN, could be a similar situation where even if there's muddied waters, he gets those valuable touches, some stuff in the red zone. He gets a lot of PPR points through his reception ability as well. And obviously he has that tie with Trevor Lawrence. So I agree. I think we'll keep our eyes on Jacksonville. I like ETN as of now. We'll see what they do. But even if they do bring in one of these older names, I still do think that would turn ETN into a buy just because his perceived value will go down because he's been pretty tough to acquire over the past couple of months.
Now, we talked about the Baker Mayfield situation, and a lot of that has implications for the next player we're going to talk about. Amari Cooper signed to Cleveland as free agency has gone on. That deal, essentially swapping 5th-round picks, Browns acquiring a 6th for Amari Cooper, is looking more and more like one of the best values so far in this free agency period. And that was just an outright trade. That wasn't even a free agent signing. So great move by the Browns to say, hey, we know Jarvis is leaving. Odell is officially gone. Let's start to rebuild this wide receiver core. And I love Amari Cooper at this point in his career being a short and intermediate target magnet. I don't think he's going to be that outside clasher, that Mike Williams type player, an A.J. Brown type player. For his age and what he's shown us, I think a lot of that ceiling is gone. Obviously in Cleveland, it's a run-first offense, so that hurts him. But I think on paper, a lot of people think this is a horrible move for Amari Cooper in fantasy. But now he actually lands in a situation where his number one competitor is Donovan Peoples-Jones and David Njoku. Now, we could see the Browns draft a Chris Olave, a Jameson Williams, a David Bell, a George Pickens to play on the outside or be a stretch Z. But I like Amari Cooper being this clear number one in Cleveland. Even if they do bring in a rookie, more than likely that rookie is not going to outproduce Cooper in year one if Cooper can stay healthy and essentially get 150-plus targets this season.
On paper, with what we know right now, it's a neutral move at best for Amari Cooper. Like, I get the upside. He has the opportunity to be more of that clear wide receiver one. But in Dallas, with Gallup there, I guess it was a really tough split between the 3 guys, plus Dalton Schultz not getting more involved. So I agree with you. I think it's a neutral move with some upside, depending on what else they do at the wide receiver position, depending on who the quarterback is this season. So there are still just a lot of unknowns with this move to Cleveland. But I do agree with you in the sense that if people are fading Amari Cooper because they're worried about the Browns offense being run heavy and they're worried about the Baker Mayfield situation, I do think it's a good buy window for Cooper in dynasty leagues. If you have a contending roster, you need a flex guy. Cooper should be a wide receiver 2 plus this season, I think, in Cleveland. So if you can get that as your flex on the cheap for a contending roster, I'm all about it. And I do think the Baker situation is going to impact this in a really big way, because if they do move on from Baker, I expect the Browns to address the quarterback position in some way. Like, Jameis Winston's going to be a free agent. You got guys like Marcus Mariota, that's a free agent. There are still some other guys around the league, Jimmy Garoppolo, Gardner Minshew, that could be traded for. So I don't think they're going to get rid of Baker Mayfield and then just, who do they have? Case Keenum as their backup, start Case Keenum for the entire season. So yes, there is some concern about the quarterback spot, but they're going to address it in some way. And there's a good chance it's just going to be Baker Mayfield anyway. So I like it. If he is that target funnel for the Cleveland Browns, he could be an 150 target guy this year. And you're right. Even if they do bring in another name, it's not going to be a CeeDee Lamb. It's not going to be a Michael Gallup caliber type player. If it's a rookie, it's going to take them a while, most likely, to get ramped up as well. So I think Cooper does have a lot of upside just from that target volume perspective in Cleveland. And
if one of these rookies does land in Cleveland, they're going to be a value based on landing spot, because people are going to say, oh, the Browns, it's terrible. But now there's a lot of turnover. There's churn. There's upside in the unknown in Cleveland. One thing to note, the Browns do have the 13th overall pick in this draft. So they could be a prime landing spot should Baker leave to go and get a Kenny Pickett, try their hand maybe with a Malik Willis. He could fall to 13th overall because no one likes any of these quarterbacks. We'll see. We'll see. And they do have 4 picks in the top 100. They have 13th overall, 44th overall, 78th overall, and 99th overall. So we could even see a Davis Mills type situation. Should they take a flyer on a guy later on in the draft? Maybe a Sam Howell goes to them, 78th overall, early 3rd round. We'll keep our eyes and ears to the Cleveland Browns. But let's talk about another team in Florida that's making some splash free agency moves. We talked about the Jaguars. But let's dive into the Miami Dolphins, specifically their running back core now. They signed Chase Edmonds on a 2-year, $12.6 million deal. They bring in Raheem Mostert. So congratulations, Mike McDaniel. You meet up with your boy again from San Francisco. They bring in Mostert on a 1-year, $3.1 million deal. They did, just for what it's worth, go out and get Raiders fullback Alec Ingold on a 2-year, $7.5 million
that could be
deal.
valuable.
Probably going to play
matter.
that Kyle Juszczyk role. Tells you this is it going to be a San Francisco run game. Not copy and paste everything over like we love, right? Elijah Mitchell. We're not saying Chase Edmonds is now Elijah Mitchell, but that's kind of the upside that it feels like. And the fact that Raheem Mostert is that primary competitor for Edmonds right now, you got to love Edmonds in a redraft context. I'm kind of out on him in Dynasty because he is 25 years old. I don't know how much pass catching volume he's going to get. Myles Gaskin's still on that roster. It could just be an ugly committee there between Mostert, Gaskin, Edmonds, Duke Johnson. Could re-sign with them. We saw them kind of have a rotation in the running back room in Miami last season. But are you in on Edmonds as of right now? Right, they could draft somebody, but as of right now, he's looking like a clear RB1 for the Miami Dolphins.
First of all, I just have to say it's almost as if when free agency started, like everyone's phones were dead except the Dolphins and the Jaguars, because they're like the only teams that made all these moves and everyone else like did a little bit here and a little bit there. We've seen some other stuff trickle in, but the list of moves for Miami and for Jacksonville is so long. But back to your question about Edmonds, I like Edmonds right now. It's tough because we don't know what they're going to do in the draft. That's going to be really telling. But I do think this Edmonds-Mostert backfield is interesting, and I think both guys could have value. It's funny because the second they signed Edmonds, that happened first. We were texting, and I was saying, whichever running back the Dolphins draft, I love that value with a guy like a Chase Edmonds. Like if they take a Brian Robinson type guy, if they take a Zamir White, a Zamir White type guy that's between the tackles grinder to go along with Chase Edmonds, that could be pretty interesting, and both could have value. They go out and get Raheem Mostert. So I'm suddenly more interested in Chase Edmonds, to your point, because they brought in Mostert. We knew it was going to be something. We knew he wasn't going to be this workhorse. But I think Chase Edmonds could carve out a really interesting role in Miami. He could just have that Myles Gaskin role that we've seen. He's going to have some up weeks. He's going to have some down weeks. But interestingly enough, I actually like this for Raheem Mostert a lot. Raheem Mostert was a guy – Dynasty obviously is a different story because he's like 29 going on 30 right now. So you might get 1 year of value from him. But I just picked him up off waivers in a league after the season was over. Just free agent, who knows what's going to happen. He's had good seasons in the past. But for Mostert, especially if we look at redraft leagues, if you can get him on the cheap in a Dynasty league, or if he was on your waivers, like there's a lot to like for him. He could get 10 to 12 carries, 10 to 15 carries in this offense with McDaniel coming over from that San Francisco scheme. And when he was healthy in San Francisco, he was the guy. He still got the speed. I get it. He's older, but there are outliers from time to time at the running back position. So just because he's 30 years old doesn't mean he automatically sucks. He could still have a good season and a valuable season. And if Raheem Mostert ran for 850 yards and had like 8 touchdowns this year, I wouldn't be surprised. So I think he could give you that mid to probably low end RB2 value. And if he's a guy that can be your RB4 on your roster and you can plug him in to get some carries when you need him, I think it's interesting for Mostert. So this backfield, I wouldn't say it's the most exciting from like a talent perspective, but I think the skill sets of Mostert and Edmonds really complement each other well. And with McDaniel in that run scheme from San Francisco, if he can implement that in Miami, I think we are going to see some value from both of these guys, but I think it's probably more mid to low end running back 2 value at best. And I would prefer Edmonds, especially in a PPR.
Edmonds will be interesting just from that pass catching volume standpoint. We've seen what Gaskin is able to do at times. Maybe Edmonds brings that to the table and a little bit more. We'll see if that's more of a Dolphins front office and coaching decision versus player talent. But I've pretty much been an Edmonds truther, was all over his value in Dynasty last year and in years prior until James Conner became everything and more that we wanted Edmonds to be. But speaking of James Conner, let's talk about Arizona. They bring back James Conner back on a 3-year, $21 million deal. Fine running back money for a guy who has had health problems, a guy who can't stay on the field all the time, but a guy who does have a 3-down skill set and can bring stability to that backfield. I have a sense that Arizona is probably going to draft another scat back like a Kyron Williams or a Rashad White or a James Cook, who'd be really, really fun, all three of those guys in that offense. But James Conner, is he a guy that you're interested in? Because in redraft, I'm actually loving his projected value right now.
Yeah, for redraft, absolutely. I just think it's interesting that you see Arizona, honestly, good for James Conner, comes over from Pittsburgh on close to a minimum deal and has this 1 year prove it season, and he balls out. So good for him locking up 3 year, $21 million deal at his age. That's phenomenal. If I'm Arizona, like I'm probably thinking a 2 year deal. I'm probably not paying him that, but hey, he balled out and he earned it. So I think James Conner is a lot more interesting in redraft for me. I think he's going to be a hot name this year. We saw the upside that he had when Edmonds missed time, and he was a true workhorse back. You and I do both expect, like you said, for Arizona to bring in some kind of scat back, some kind of running back to play that Chase Edmonds role. But even when Edmonds was active, like James Conner had a ton of rushing touchdowns. That's not going to go away with the upside in this offense. We've seen the departure of Christian Kirk already. Obviously, we've talked about Chase Edmonds at length. AJ Green is likely not coming back. So they are a little bit low on weapons, and they're going to need James Conner to show up again. So I like him in redraft a lot. In Dynasty, I'm going to be honest with you. I think right now you should be selling James Conner. He's one of those names that's felt like a Melvin Gordon, felt like one of these old, I don't want to say busted running backs, but you know the running backs I'm talking about. They're like 25, 26 years old. They're kind of an RB2-ish in redraft, and you're like, any day now the wheels are going to fall off. Everyone's burned by Todd Gurley. Everyone's burned by Le'Veon Bell. Everyone's burned by Devontae Freeman. We've seen it happen with these guys. So it's like, okay, when are those wheels going to fall off? I might try to get one more year out of him as like an RB2 or my third running back on the roster to plug in on bye weeks and injuries. But when's it going to happen? With James Conner, it felt like that last season. He had this one last redemption tour. But this 3 year deal is interesting, especially with Edmonds now gone. So I think there are going to be a lot of people in your leagues that are very interested in James Conner. So I would start fishing him out there, see what you can get for him. By all means, if you can get a late first-round pick or a 2020, any kind of first-round pick for James Conner, you take that immediately, in my opinion. But I'd fish him out there and see what you can get, just because I think a lot of people with Edmonds gone, with the contract that he got, are going to buy back in, when in reality, I think he's going to be great this season. We both said it. We love him in redraft, but you might not get a better sell window for James Conner than you're going to get right now.
18 touchdowns in 2021 for James Conner.
That's crazy.
Let that sink in. That's the LeGarrette Blount season that we just saw from James Conner. If you can sell him off the hype, a 26.8-year-old running back, you got to sell him off of this contract hype. People thinking, he's on this fast pace of play, Cardinals offense with some weapons that they need. I just don't think Connor's going to be able to hold up, especially with his efficiency really hurting last year. Now, part of that low yards per attempt were because he was getting carries on the goal line, so not that much room for him to run. But he should be a guy that we expect to miss 3+ games a season, but should see 200+ rushing attempts, 700+ yards, and 30+ receptions, which, to your point, Alex, is that mid to low end RB2. And especially down the stretch as seasons go on in redraft, like you got to love James Conner because he can be a fill-in. The touchdowns are going to boost his value. Maybe you can even sell him to a sucker down the stretch. Zach Ertz was another name that was brought in, 3 years, $31.6 million. I know you just acquired him in a league that we're in, Alex. What do you like about Zach Ertz other than the fact that you were able to get him for CJ Uzomah in a late second?
Yeah, I actually got him for CJ Uzomah in a late third. So second would have been a little bit rich for me, but I threw out Uzomah before Conklin went to the Jets, a late third-round pick to a team that's kind of in the middle. I'm a contending. I won the league. I won the championship in that league last year. It's tight end premium. I have Mark Andrews as my tight end, but it's a 2-flex league. So my second flex spot is a little bit dicey, and it's tight end premium, so that 1.5 PPR. So my thought with Zach Ertz is like, look, the deal is fantastic. 3 years, $31 million. Like they're clearly committing to him and paying him at the tight end spot. He showed a lot last year. I was looking at his numbers earlier today. And since the trade to Arizona last year, I think it was like week 6 was the first game he played for them around that time. From then through the end of the season, he was the tight end 4 in PPR behind only the big 3, behind only Kelsey, Kittle, and Mark Andrews. So Zach Ertz went to Arizona and absolutely thrived. And now you look at what's happening there. We've talked about the departure of Chase Edmonds, the departure of Christian Kirk, the likely departure of AJ Green. Like, they're going to need Zach Ertz to be a big part of this offense. He had a lot of really big games for them last season, so I think they're going to continue to rely on him in Arizona. So for a dynasty roster where I could use some upside at a flex, at a double flex spot and a tight end premium, even a good solid veteran backup tight end that I think still has 2 years of runway left in his career, it made a lot of sense for me to go get Zach Ertz, because I think we could see him as a top 5 tight end again, just because of the target volume he's going to get in Arizona. So I get the sentiment around him. He's getting older. People are scared. But if you can acquire him on the super cheap, like, that's why I sent out Uzama in the 310, because I'm like, who am I going to pick? Like, Uzama is nothing to me, honestly, especially with Conklin going to New York as well. And then the 310, it's like most of the time the 310 isn't even going to find his way on the field in meaningful snaps for several seasons if they ever hit. So I think that's a great type of deal to get Zach Ertz. I'm going to like him in redraft as well, as one of those tight ends that you can probably get not even in the mid rounds, but maybe even a little later than that. It'll be interesting to see the kind of hype that builds for Zach Ertz if they don't bring in another receiver in the draft or in free agency, because he could climb a little bit higher than I'm comfortable with. But for redraft, as things stand right now, I think Zach Ertz would be a top 6 tight end for me, probably behind Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, Andrews, Pitts. And then I think Ertz would be right in that tier with guys like TJ Hawkinson, which I know is a little bit of a hot take, but just the opportunity in Arizona with how much they like to throw the ball. I love the move for the Cardinals, and I absolutely love it for Zach Ertz.
What I love, too, about that deal is the fact that you have Kyler Murray in the Superflex League on a contending roster. You want to have those stacks. That's how you take
I just realized.
Contender over the top. You didn't even know that?
I now have a Kyler Ertz stack, and I have a Lamar Andrews stack. Let's go.
Money. So I want to talk about a guy that we didn't talk about when we covered Miami, but he did sign there. We're actually going to talk about 2 wide receivers, because both these guys are very comparable. Former Cowboy Cedrick Wilson, who did have not a fantasy breakout season, but a breakout season on the NFL stage, made some clutch plays in prime time. Cedrick Wilson was able to fill in nicely for Amari Cooper when he missed time, CeeDee Lamb when he missed time, Michael Gallup when he missed time. Cedrick Wilson gets a 3-year, $22.8 million deal with the Miami Dolphins. But Russell Gage, another solid high floor play for fantasy, a solid NFL wide receiver 3, gets a 3-year, $30 million deal. So both these guys get deals $30 million or less. Both are 3-year deals. Both have just turned 26 years old. Both were drafted in the 6th round. Both guys are very similar athletically. Both run 4.55s. Russell Gage, 6 foot, 186 pounds. Cedrick Wilson, 6'2", 188 pounds. These guys, we're not getting overly excited for either of these guys in any fantasy format, but they are these high floor plays that you probably had on the back of your bench as a flyer. I know a league where I had some Cowboys playmakers. I just added Cedrick Wilson as a depth piece, and now he could be a guy that gets onto the field consistently and is a target magnet. I actually like the Cedrick Wilson move for Jalen Waddle right now, because the competition is not that high. They're bringing Cedrick Wilson in to be likely the number 3 in that offense behind Waddle and Gesicki, who they did franchise tag. But what's your thought between these 2 players? Obviously, we'd rather have Gage because he's in the better offense with Tom Brady and the boys, Chris Godwin coming off the ACL. But interesting to me how very similar players getting the same type of deal, same draft capital, same profile.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I like Gage more as well in both redraft and dynasty. Gage has shown us a ton over the past couple of seasons. He's really shown out when he's gotten the chance to be the number 2. He hasn't done quite as well as the number 1, but he has had those blow-up games in that target funnel. So I think Russell Gage coming into Tampa with Tom Brady playing that Antonio Brown role is going to be super valuable. I think Gage can play that role, and he can play it very well. I know there's some rumors swirling right now about Julio Jones potentially going to Tampa, so that might shake some things up a little bit if he's in the mix as well. But with where things stand right now with Gage, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, we expect Gronk to come back. I like Gage as this flex wide receiver who's going to have those pop weeks. It's going to be most of the time probably a Godwin or an Evans week, but we are going to have some Russell Gage weeks as well. So 3-year, $30 million deal is interesting. I like him more for 2022 because we think about it. If Brady decides to retire after this year, they still do have Mike Evans under contract. They still do have Chris Godwin, who they just extended on a 3-year deal. So if Brady's gone, you say to yourself, okay, whoever's the Brady successor, can they support 3 wide receivers? So that becomes the question. but the value definitely jumps for Russell Gage going to Tampa. And I think he's going to have a really good season. I like Cedrick Wilson as well, but on a lower scale. Like I would prefer Gage, obviously, but I think Cedrick Wilson is still a really sneaky name in Miami. They made a ton of moves, but we are seeing Devontae Parker get a little bit older. He has struggled with a lot of injuries. So it could be the Jalen Waddle and the Cedrick Wilson show in Miami. So I think Cedrick Wilson's going to have a lot more opportunity than he had in Dallas. And to your point, when he was in Dallas and he got the targets, he got the opportunity, he was smooth and he was effective and he was efficient. So with Cedrick Wilson, if you believe in him, I'd be willing to send – I think people would sell him for like a 4th-round pick. Like I think people are like, Cedrick Wilson, what the heck? This is a waiver name. And they'd sell him for like an early 4th. That's something I'd definitely be willing to do. Might even throw out a late 3rd just to see if he can break out on the new team. But in a lot of leagues, he's probably still on the waiver wire as well. So I know after last year in the Gallup and Cooper injuries, he probably got scooped up in a lot of places. But I do like Cedrick Wilson in Miami. And it's always fun to see these guys who are talented but are buried on a depth chart get a new opportunity on a new team just to see what they can do when they get the opportunity on the field.
Gage was like our go-to deep shot of the week.
Yeah,
when we were doing
for a while,
like weekly redraft analysis over this season, but even years past where Julio was missing time, Ridley was missing time. It was like, get Russell Gage in a high pass attempt offense, which is what he's going to be in Tampa Bay. He was 13th in yards per route run last year. So Russell Gage was super efficient last season. I was surprised to see he commanded a 22% target share. Pretty impressive for a guy that was competing. Granted, Ridley didn't play the whole season. Things cleared out in Atlanta, but you wouldn't expect for a Russell Gage, right? A guy who has the name equity of Russell Gage. You don't think of him as a 22% target share, top 15 yards per route run type player. Let's talk about another receiver who hasn't been getting the hype. Thought he might land in New England. We thought he might land in Vegas, but he actually lands in Detroit. DJ Chark gets a 1-year, $10 million prove-it deal. I don't know why Jacksonville didn't give him that same offer and went after Zay Jones with more money. But DJ Chark landing in Detroit is kind of the safe play for Amon-Ra St. Brown. You don't see Chark as a threat to take over at least the large target share that Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to command this year, especially coming off a rookie season where he went nuclear down the stretch. We'll have Hawkinson coming back. We'll have Swift coming back. But for DJ Chark, is he a guy that you're interested in at all? Is he a guy that you're keeping your eyes on in Dynasty? I think he's just going to be an upside name in redraft like he has been, like he was last season, even though people thought he might be the number 1 in Jacksonville. You and I were way more on the Marvin Jones side of that train, so thank God for that. But what do you think about Chark to the Lions? How does this impact that offense, or is he just kind of a stability depth piece to that stretch the field role?
Yeah, I think this was a disappointing landing spot for everyone involved. I think for DJ Chark, I would have loved him on a team where he could be the clear number 1 guy, or at least a strong number 2 on a really good offense. Like, I would have loved to see him go to a team like the Colts. Like, we still don't know what's going to happen at the quarterback spot, but you got Pittman. They need a number 2. I would have liked to see him go to the Patriots. Maybe he could step up as the number 1 there. Even right now, we just talked about Russell Gage leaving Atlanta. Going to Atlanta would have been interesting. Just give him the opportunity to be that alpha wide receiver 1 that he was a couple seasons ago when he broke out for the first time. So that's what we were looking for with DJ Chark. So him going to Detroit, an offense that we know isn't great. Amon-Ra is still going to be the number 1 there. They have a tight end of consequence in terms of targets and TJ Hawkinson, a pass-catching running back. So I expect Chark, you're right. I expect him to have boom weeks. I expect him to have bust weeks. Very different team situation. But I think of him now as what we've thought of like a Michael Gallup in years past. It's like when you start Michael Gallup, it could be a Michael Gallup week where he goes for like 7 for 100 and a touchdown, or it could be a 2 for 35 week. So I expect DJ Chark to have a lot of ups and downs in Detroit. But I do think it impacts Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. I expect Amon-Ra to still be the 1. But DJ Chark is a solid player. Like, he is going to take downfield targets away. He's going to command some target share on the outside. I don't think he comes in and takes everything, but you got to think about Amon-Ra's stretch last season when he won people leagues. And you had TJ Hawkinson, who was out with injury. You had DeAndre Swift in and out of the lineup with injury. Like, it was as target funnel can get with Amon-Ra. So now you had TJ back into the mix. You had DeAndre Swift back into the mix, and you bring DJ Chark in on the outside, and suddenly things are going to start to spread out a little bit. So I do think Amon-Ra still earns those targets. I think he's going to get facilitated touches. He's a talented player. But DJ Chark, I do think impacts him in some way. And I think if anything, it's good for Jared Goff. Goff's not a guy we're interested in for fantasy and really dynasty or redraft at this point. But he was dealt a really tough hand last season. He had a couple decent games, but mostly bad games. So who knows? Maybe the Lions start to have a solid offense. Because when you think about it on paper, the pieces aren't bad. They have a good O-line. They have DeAndre Swift, Hawkinson, Amon-Ra, and now they add a piece on the outside. We know Goff isn't great, but he's not one of these dust quarterbacks. So who knows? Maybe Detroit will take a step up, and instead of being one of the bottom feeder offenses in the league, if they can just get to close to the league average, I think it would be a big win for all the pieces involved. But coming back to Chark, overall, I think disappointing for both his value and the other pieces in Detroit.
Now, the Lions do have the second overall pick. They also have the second pick in the second round, and they have the last pick in the first round. So they have 3 picks early, and then they have the second pick in the third round, and then another pick in the third round, 97th overall. So this is another team that has a ton of draft capital early in this draft. Unfortunately for them, right, they need to add that quarterback piece to truly be contenders. They're probably going to continue to rebuild again this season. I don't see a ton changing there. I'm still going to be on Swift at his value. Even with other playmakers coming into the fold, I think he's still going to get his and be efficient. But who knows? Maybe they do reach on a QB. Maybe they grab a Malik Willis second overall. I think that'd be a dumb move for them, but could be the next step considering they have all this draft capital. And I don't know, Chark isn't a nothing, which is kind of what we're trying to get across here. It's like it's something. It's not a huge impact, but it isn't. Now, J.D. McKissic, a lot of drama with J.D. McKissic, right? He gets signed, quote unquote, or agrees to terms with the Buffalo Bills. And we're like, oh my gosh, Antonio Gibson, this is looking just like the Joe Mixon situation where Gio Bernard leaves and now he's set to get all this pass catching volume. Wheels were up for Gibson. And then J.D. McKissic hits him with the hezzy, comes back to the Washington Commanders. I don't really think it changes much for Gibson's value. I still have him as a top 10 dynasty running back. We did see him carve out 50-plus targets last year when McKissic was in and out of the lineup. But for a guy at the age and the role that J.D. McKissic plays, like, I'm not saying that he's going to have a huge monster impact and just kill Gibson's value, as some people are acting like right now. If you can get Gibson on the cheap because of this, maybe people think Carson Wentz is totally going to ruin that offense. I actually like Gibson more this year than I did last year, just with some of the adjustments that they've made, right? We were excited for this whole offense because they bring in Curtis Samuel. Well, now he hopefully is coming back healthy, ready to go. They brought in Ryan Fitzmagic. We thought, they're going to air the ball out. This is great for Terry McLaurin. Carson Wentz essentially Ryan Fitzmagic with 10 years of youth added on. Like, very similar from the way they're going to play, the production they're going to put on the field. They're going to make dumb plays at times, but these are guys that can air the ball out. They can get balls to the outside. They can keep an offense moving. They're going to check it down. The pace of play could be there, and this is a team that runs the ball more than they pass. So I still like Gibson, who was top 5 in carries last year. Alex, any 2 cents to throw in on this J.D. McKissic deal?
Not really. It's easy because he's back, and we can pretty much just copy and paste what we've seen over the past couple seasons. Like, nothing – I don't expect much to change in this backfield breakdown. Like, Gibson gets the bulk of the carries. He gets the goal line carries, gets some receiving work at times, and then McKissic is involved. There's a lot of plays where they're both on the field at the same time as well. Like, I think we've seen McKissic's role get inflated because Curtis Samuel was out, and they started to use him in some of those gadget-type ways and facilitate these screen passes to him and things. So I think for Antonio Gibson, it's what we've seen. I do think there's more upside than in years past because Carson Wentz, say what you want, but he should be an upgrade to the offense at quarterback. Even if he's not great, even if he's just as average as it can get, he'll be an upgrade to the offense at quarterback. And Antonio Gibson was playing hurt all of last season. So Antonio Gibson should be back to 100% for this year, and he should be great. So it doesn't impact me a ton. Obviously would have loved to see him go somewhere else. I think that's where we could have started to talk about what does that mean for Gibson, who's left in Washington. But I think Gibson's still one of our top guys in Dynasty. He's a top 12 Dynasty running back. He's going to be top 12 in redraft as well. So not too much else to add there. So, Steph, really quickly before we sign off, I want to throw in just some sneaky moves that have been happening around the NFL, stuff to pay attention to in your league, see if you can buy low on any of these guys. And ironically, most have been at the tight end position. So a lot of the big deals are reported on, but a lot of stuff flies under the radar, especially when a ton of news is coming in at once. So just a couple of names to hit on. I know we already talked about Zach Ertz. But Hayden Hurst signed with the Cincinnati Bengals. CJ Uzomah is gone. Hayden Hurst signs a 1-year deal with Cincinnati. This is a guy who is first-round draft capital, has been solid in his career, just hasn't given us an explosive fantasy football performance. So Hayden Hurst, now with Joe Burrow and the boys in Cincy, could be really interesting for your roster. A couple more to throw out there. Mo Alley-Cox with the Indianapolis Colts was brought back. Jack Doyle retired. So Mo Alley-Cox, I know they have Kylan Granson, who was a rookie last season, but Mo Alley-Cox should have an opportunity to step up as the clear tight end 1 in Indy. And one more, Ricky Seals-Jones had a lot of really solid weeks in Washington over the past couple seasons, goes to the New York Giants, who lost Evan Ingram and Kyle Rudolph. So 3 super deep tight end names. Like, we're in a startup draft right now that's finishing, and I took them in like the 27th, 28th, and 29th round. So now I have 3 interesting late round tight ends that could show some streamability or some plug and play ability at points this season. So just some other names to keep an eye on.
Now, there was breaking news. I'm not going to freak out over this, but Damian Williams did sign a 1-year deal with the Falcons while we were recording. Wheels up. Damian Williams, RB1 in Atlanta.
I got to pick him up.
They're definitely going to draft somebody to play that rookie running back role, but it tells you they at least know that is a position they need to address. They're not going to move forward.
Maybe that means Cordell Patterson's not coming back. That probably confirms that CPET's gone.
We will see. I can't wait to see where Deshaun Watson's going to sign. And when he does, if he goes to Atlanta, Kyle Pitts is already going first round in tight end premium super flex leagues in Dynasty. I don't know how much higher he can go up, but I'm going to be really excited to see. It's probably going to create even more value in these leagues with people pushing tight end way higher than they probably should. But thank you all so much for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.